This is TAU Unbound, the English language podcast of Tel Aviv University. Please welcome your host, Ido Aharoni, Tel Aviv University's graduate, member of the Board of Governors, lecturer, writer, and veteran diplomat.
Welcome to yet another episode of TAU Unbound. I'm Ido Aharoni, your host, and it is my distinct pleasure to host in our studio today someone that I've been following for many, many years, and I'm a great fan of your work, Professor Eyal Benvenisti. Welcome to our studio.
Thanks for having me.
For the benefit of our viewers and our listeners, I'll just say that he is a very distinguished professor of law at Tel Aviv University. Until recently, was also the Yale Professor of International Law at Cambridge University since 2016. He received his first degree from the Hebrew University in 1984, then a second degree, LL.M, from Yale in 1988, and then a doctor's degree also from Yale in 1990. He's also affiliated with some other great universities such as NYU, Harvard, Columbia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and we already mentioned Yale. Wow, quite a resume you have.
Well,
and we know that your specialty is international law, human rights, and most recently you came back to Israel when the so-called reform was introduced by the current Israeli coalition. We'll get to that. But before we begin, you are a son to one of the most famous Jewish dynasties, the Benvenistis. Tell us a little bit about your family background.
Well, I could have a whole day talking about the family dynasty. So, but maybe I'll start with my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, who came to Palestine in 1912 when he was 15 years old. Decided to emigrate to Palestine and start a life of a Jewish Zionist, and did whatever he could to make the dream come true.
And he was from Greece? Yeah. What part of Greece?
He would say he was from the Ottoman Empire. He didn't like the Greek when they entered Salonika in 1912, and this is why he emigrated, actually. Salonika is in the north of Greece nowadays. Yeah.
And when did you discover that you're interested in law, and more specifically in the international implications of law?
Right. So I think I started law school because I was interested in the way reason and language controls power, and how when I was in the second year of undergraduate, I discovered that the most challenging aspect of controlling power is in time 4. So the greatest challenge of controlling power is during armed hostilities, when you need a legal argument to tell the commander, no, this you can't do.
Because law, in your understanding, is what stands between society and order or society and chaos, right? Law is the system that prevents chaos.
This is the system that is designed in human society to arbitrate and to determine who's right and who's wrong, as opposed to war or fighting. So, as opposed to the Hobbesian idea of people against people.
Yes, and you also made a very clear distinction between people that understand the purpose of law. You said the purpose of law is to apply to all, right? To all segments in society. And that sometimes stands in contradiction to governments that want to have unrestricted power.
Exactly. So I think part of my work has been also in domestic public law, so constitutional law, administrative law, and the idea there was also how to constrain arbitrary power. Governments want something, they know what they want to achieve, but they might not regard the interests of everybody, and what law is supposed to tell them is to take into account everybody and take the interests of everybody and the rights of everybody into account in your decision making.
So I'd like to ask you questions specifically about what's happening in Israel, and perhaps Israel is just in the canary in the mine shaft. Maybe what's happening here is is going to happen, is already happening in other Western societies. But before that, if you can tell us a little bit more about how do you understand international law? There is a perception out there that international law is some sort of a set of laws that all countries agree upon, and that there is one central resource that you can go to and say, that's international law. But the reality is more complex, I think, right? It's a set of agreements. Not all countries are signatories to those agreements and so on.
Yeah. So there's not one law book that everybody subscribes to. There are several different conventions, treaties, and what we call customary international law, law that all states are supposed to have agreed to. Now, there are some instances in which you do have a treaty that everybody, or almost everybody, is party to. So, for example, what is well known in Israel, the Geneva Conventions concerning the conduct of hostility, the laws of war. And here there will be still debates about how to interpret the law, and what do you do if there's a case of lack of compliance with the law. And the thing is that, as opposed to a domestic legal system where you have a court that determines the outcomes, in international law, sometimes you don't have a court, and sometimes you have a court, but you don't trust that court. Or there are parties who refuse to appear before the court. So there are issues of identifying the law in international law, there are issues of implementing the law and compliance with the law. All these issues are subject to pressure and to confrontation between state parties, but it doesn't mean that the law does not exist, and that the law doesn't have a moral value that people take into account quite seriously.
Now you mentioned, please go ahead.
For example, when there are different explanations, or when I want to talk to, say, military commanders, and they ask me why should we follow that international law. So different responses to this question. One response, because the law reflects morality. Another question is, this is what people or courts in different countries believe the law to be. And there's yet a third response that some are influenced by, which is, this is the expectations from other governments. And if you want to have more freedom to act, if you want to have less restraints, you should follow that kind of law.
In other words, when you, for example, investigate yourself and you do it seriously and you do it wholeheartedly, it's easier for the world to say, yeah, I believe you.
Exactly.
I trust you.
Exactly.
I trust your investigation.
That's the point. And this is what the international wants countries to do. It wants to encourage them to take into account the law seriously, so that they resolve, they provide mechanisms that reduce the pressure on the international organizations to do their own investigations.
So, for example, the investigation that we conducted after the Sabra and Shatila massacre actually was one of those examples. The world took it very seriously.
Yeah, and similarly, when the Israeli court took into account seriously the route of the separation barrier or the wall, that was also an indication for the International Court of Justice that the Israeli court was taking seriously international law.
Which is something that most of us don't understand when we discuss international law, and thank you for clarifying this issue. Now, you used a very important word that I don't hear often in discussions about law, and you use the word trust, and which means that the public has to trust the court system, the legal system, the political system. If there is no trust, it's very difficult to accomplish anything.
Exactly, and this is the crisis we are facing today in Israel and around the world, trust in institutions. There are those who try to manipulate this trust in order to gain power in what we call, or many of us call, populist leaders who exploit this lack of trust. But this is basically the problem that we're facing. Democracy is based on a healthy mistrust. You don't trust. You don't want to trust the government. You want to make sure that the government is accountable to you. You want to make sure that the government is accountable to you because you don't want because you are afraid that the government might promote interests that are not the one that is supposed to. But when the mistrust becomes too deep and too broad, and you don't trust even the monitoring agencies, you don't trust institutions, you don't trust the party that is leading or the legislature, you don't trust democratic institutions. This could be the end of democracy.
Now, in your view, when did the erosion in the trust that people have in the legal system start?
You mean in Israel?
Yeah, in Israel.
I think it started in the early 2000s. It began in the late 90s, but also mainly in the early 2000s. And it was, I think, the different explanations for that. But it was manipulated. There were political forces who wanted to challenge the leadership of the court in terms of the agenda, political agenda, and I think what we are facing nowadays is a situation where a huge segment of the Israeli society simply do not trust the court, do not trust the Attorney General, do not trust public decision makers who invoke the so-called rule of law.
And would you agree if I said that a big part of it is the unpleasant experience that people had, the unpleasant interaction that people actually had when they dealt with the court system in Israel, which has a lot to do with, when they were confronted with messages, negative messages about the court system, it corresponded well with their own unpleasant experience they had, because the system is inefficient, because the system is, the cases drag for years and so on.
Yeah, I don't know. One Supreme Court judge used to say that inherently in the system, in judicial system, there is a loser and a winner, and the loser will always try or find the reason for its failure by the inability of the court to make the right decision. So that's the problem of mistrust is inherent also in the judicial system.
Right.
Not only in the political system.
Right. And what I'm trying to say is that the judicial system was vulnerable to begin with.
Yeah, every judicial system is vulnerable to begin with. The judicial system in the U.S. that is based on the jury system is based on mistrust in the courts,
right,
inherited from the British system. So mistrust is inherent in every human system. And this is why you have this word trust. And the legal machinery that is designed to make sure that the trustee does what the beneficiaries wants or the beneficiary needs rather than what the trustee.
Now, let's talk about what's happening in Israel. So you, I think, clarified something that is counterintuitive to many of us, which is the difference between the rule of the majority and the rule of law and the misunderstanding of what democracy is all about, which we discovered since 2023 to be a real issue in Israeli public life.
Yes. So I think the majority that is elected that informs the coalition and leads the legislator, the Knesset here, is also a trustee, in a sense that it does not only represent itself, it is entrusted with the power of government. But the power of government is designed to protect everybody. So even the minority, even the loser in the elections, are their views and their wishes and their rights are relevant when the majority decides on their policies. And when the majority fails to realize that it is a trustee rather than a group that decide for what it wants and only what matters to it, then it fails its main task, which is to lead the nation, to lead everybody, to be the voice, the trustee of everybody, every citizen. So it's not only a matter of people used to. I hear people say, it's the will of the majority against the rights of the minority. The rights of the minority must be protected. What I'm saying is that it's not only the rights of the minorities that should be protected by the majority. The majority must conceive itself as responsible for everybody, and rule the country for the benefit of everyone. This is what it was elected for.
Now, what are the implications of a crisis like what are the potential implications of a crisis like what we're facing today, where the perception of the current governing coalition in Israel is exactly that their job is to, winner takes it all. Their job is to promote their agenda. And basically what they're saying is that you lost, now it's our turn to set the agenda. And I think that they figured that because of the demographic changes in Israeli society, they will never lose majority. That's their thinking.
Well, from that perspective, I think what they're saying is that they need to counter the hegemony of the previous majority that ruled also for its benefit rather than for the benefit of everybody. So kind of a correction.
Right.
For me, I don't want to judge this coalition or the other coalition. What I want to think about is how to recreate trust, how to restore trust in a situation where there is complete mistrust. Nobody trusts any institution in Israel. And this requires going back one step, two steps, maybe four or five steps, and rethink how do we establish or reestablish democratic institutions that can be trusted, can gain the trust, can be worthy of the trust of everyone.
What would be the direction for a solution? Because clearly, other than building a strong military, and I say that since 1948 until today, this was the main task of the Israeli society. Building a bunker, a fortified bunker, a very sophisticated bunker. But at the end of the day, it's a bunker, still is a bunker. So what would you say is the general direction for a solution to restore trust?
Yeah. So I think there are several, and we need to explore all of them, starting from education, starting from coming to terms with the fact that winner doesn't take all. So this approach is simply flawed. And coming to terms also with the fact that the judicial answer is not always acceptable, and you can't rule with the judicial fiat. So you need more involvement of individuals in decision making. You need to create situations where people can voice their views, maybe on the local level, maybe reform local government. maybe reform the way parties are managed. In Israel nowadays, there's almost no regulation of parties. So you have leaders of parties that can decide whoever they want will be on the next in the next Knesset if they are elected. And so internal democracy within parties can be a huge contribution to create more participatory political process, to ensure that the opposition in the legislature has some tools, effective tools to control government, to rethink checks and balances, and also to think about, for example, the neoliberal agenda that led to the depletion of the social support, and think about ways to encourage various communities to talk to each other, to realize that it's not one against the other. It's a joint venture, and everybody can benefit from it. It's these are lofty words.
Would you recommend doing some legislation that would limit the power of the algorithm? Because I think that a big part of what you're describing is the design of the algorithm. The algorithm is pushing us to, is pitting us against each other. That's what the algorithm is designed to do.
Right. So there's a lot of thinking now about the algorithm, or about controlling social media platforms, and ensuring that they provide less opportunities for manipulation of the information that everybody receives. So that's an important dimension as well. That is this is not unique to Israel, but it is a very important aspect. I agree.
Can you say which countries deal with it more effectively than we do?
So, for example, in terms of regulating parties, there is a trend in the last 20 years to impose more and more regulation of parties. Germany, for example, Germany insists on democratic decision-making within parties. Even the right-wing AfD is democratic. It's amazing. And they are very successful because of that. So there are opportunities to, for example, to ensure that the way parties use the budget is public, and there's accountability for how they spend the money that they have. Could be hugely successful in terms of ensuring that politicians do what they do for the benefit of the voters, rather than for their own sake. There are countries that have more regulation of AI and platforms, and we can learn from them as well. Yeah.
And when it comes to, you said in the beginning, education. Education is a very broad subject, and I think what you're referring to is educating people about the true meaning of democracy. That democracy is not just about the mechanics of it. A lot of people think that democracy is about elections. It's way more than elections. It's a value system, right? Yeah. It's a code by which we live our lives. And so, how would you recommend for a country like Israel that is highly fragmented, highly divisive at this point, again, because of the algorithm, because of whatever happened here in the last 20 years, how would you recommend for Israel to tackle this issue on the level of education?
So that's a good question. I'm not an expert on that. And the center here at Tel Aviv University, which I am academic director, we have what we call a lab that deals with education, how to restore democratic values among the younger generation. You have to talk to them in the way they understand. You have to maybe use, I don't know, TikTok or social media in order to gain, or games, in order to gain their attention. But the thing is, I don't think it'll be difficult to convince people in the value of mutual trust and the value of democracy. I've been doing this since the so-called reform or the constitutional revolution in schools, among family, and people get it. When instead of parties, you talk about soccer game and the referee, people understand. So you need to talk to people in the way they can listen to you and absorb.
So you mentioned the center that you established here at Tel Aviv U. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so it comes from the understanding that we need to go these 4-5 steps back and understand what is the crisis that we are facing, that we're having, and understand the question or the challenges, and to develop intervention or tools to intervene and respond to the challenges. And what we do here is adopt a multidisciplinary approach. So people from different areas of academic expertise getting together and thinking about mutual problems about a problem that they address from different angles. So, for example, if I mention parties, we have lawyers, we have political scientists, we have people with practice. I mean, former politicians, and we study the problem together, trying to identify the problems and trying to adopt solutions.
We've seen throughout history the issue of overcorrection or overcompensation whenever there's social injustice identified by a certain society. We've seen that in the United States recently with the whole culture of DEI that started as actually a very good idea, celebrating diversity and so on, becoming, in the name of inclusion, they systematically started excluding groups in the name of inclusion. So what do you think is an effective answer to someone who says the Israeli system needed a correction, the judicial system, and that's the answer? What do you think is, again, adopting the mindset of your center, which is all about let's engage in a dialogue, right? What do you think is an effective answer? Because a lot of the people listening and watching us right now, they deal with people that either subscribe to opinion A or opinion B on a daily basis.
I think the only answer is I think 2 points. The first point is to accept the premise that we are here together, we live in this place, and we have to live together. And then how to live together. And nobody has, this is the second premise, nobody has exclusivity about the truth. Some of my friends, the people working together with me at the center think that completely different than me and than others. And it's very difficult to have a conversation. But we have to continue that conversation, no matter what. And they listen to me and my friends. I listen to them, and we listen to them, and we understand that there are different perceptions, and each perception is correct. So we need to together to find an answer that would be acceptable to all, based on the first premise that we have no other choice.
And I think your answer only strengthened the feeling that I had that the biggest challenge of our time is to convince people that life is not black versus white. It's not good versus evil, that there's a lot of gray and lots of complexities, and we need to be able to discuss those complexities.
Yes. I think it goes back to one of your first questions about why did I choose law? Law is a language, right? So I think with language, with interaction, you are able to convince people to move from their position to something that is new to them, but something that could be acceptable to all. I might be naive, but this is what I think it's a moral obligation to believe in it.
Well, thank you so much. We can spend hours discussing this issue because it's so relevant to life in Israel. First of all, I wanted to thank you for the great work that you do.
Thank you.
For putting the things out there so clearly, I think so succinctly, is very rare. Thank you for everything.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And to our viewers and listeners back home, goodbye from Tel Aviv until our next episode. And thank you again, Professor Benvenisti.
Thank you.